Welcome to the March the 31st, 1997 pre-taping of our history tape number 303. This is going to be playing to you on April 1 and also on April the 3rd. But we wanted you to know that in order to get these very important people, we moved our taping back one day, and we're just so thankful that this history tape number 303 is dedicated to two very special families here in Grand Prairie, Texas. And we have two representatives representing the Smith and Warder Company Incorporated that's been in Grand Prairie a long time, and we're going to let them tell us how long and all of the excitement of celebrating the 50th anniversary of something that both of their fathers began here in Grand Prairie. Welcome to the set, Mr. Carlisle Smith, Jr.
Thank you, Ruthie.
And that is E. Carlisle Smith.
E. Carlisle Smith.
You going to tell us what the E stands for?
Stands for Edgar.
Edgar. How exciting. Oh, that's
my
wonderful.
granddad's name.
Your granddad's name. And Mr. Marshall Warder, Jr. We're so glad to have you with us, Marshall.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes. And you two gentlemen are so important here in town. I'm very honored that you took the time to come and be with us today, because with the engineering portion and the architectural portion of the things you all do, you really took time out to do this for us, and the City of Grand Prairie thanks you, and our history segment really does give you our appreciation. Let's begin with Mr. Carlisle Smith. Sir, tell us a little bit about your dad that was very important to this business.
Well, he first came to Grand Prairie in the early 40s, about 1941, after a time of contracting. He originally was in the contracting business in South Texas, and for his health, after the Depression, it wasn't just his financial health, it was his physical health. He went to Corpus, couldn't stand the environment there, came back to Dallas where his family was. His father had been the first state architect of Oklahoma, and had later come to Dallas and set up a practice with his three sons. But Dad had gone to the Valley to contract and then came back, and one of his brothers had built the old Highway Hotel in Grand Prairie.
Yes, I remember that.
And he came out to manage that hotel, and on the side practice a little bit of architecture, and it grew more and more until about 1947, and he felt like he needed a partner to establish the business that we now serve in, and that's when it got started.
Okay. Anything else about your dad? That he was very important in this community. I remember the first time that I served as the president of the Women's Division of the Chamber of Commerce. He was the president.
Well, he was president at that time, but actually Marshall's dad, Mr. Warder, was the first president of the Chamber of
we're going to talk
Commerce.
about that.
And both he and Dad were both interested in politics in general. Dad served in public office here 2 terms as mayor back in the late 40s, early 50s. Marshall's dad served as an appointee of John Connolly's on the Turnpike Authority, so they had a brushing with politics all through their career. They enjoyed that part of their civic duty.
I believe they were pretty well known as the Democrats, leaders in the Democratic Party.
Yes, they were very active Democrats.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were busy gentlemen. Okay. You might want to mention your mother's name, because we've had a interview with her, but your late mom.
She was Phyllis Matlock Smith of Frost, Texas, and that's the one great thing my dad did in Corpus while he was there for a short time, was to meet and marry her there. And I was born in Corpus, and 6 months later is when they came back to the Dallas area.
Okay, all right. Tell me a little bit more about your dad and what he focused on here in Grand Prairie, Texas, beginning there at the Highway Hotel, and then what was his first major exciting adventure in architecture?
Well, I think it's a story that I heard from Marshall's dad. I heard a lot more about my dad from Marshall's dad, who was 15 years younger and who I was in business with for a longer time.
Yes.
But I think the story was that when they built the Sam R. Hamilton Masonic Lodge, there were, still above, Grand Prairie office supplies next to the First Methodist Church.
Yes.
And Marshall's dad told the story. That may be where they met. I think he said he had been the city engineer for 1 year and he got a call from my dad.
Yes.
And he said, come down here, we're building this building, and we need to set a curb grade. I need you, as city engineer, to tell me where my elevation is
Yes,
for
yes.
the street curb. And Marshall Sr. claimed that that was the elevation that set every curb in Grand Prairie at that time.
That's
I didn't realize they would have had wooden streets up until that point, but that's what he claimed, that was the most important elevation he ever set as a city engineer, and that's where they met each other, and then shortly thereafter they went into business together.
And such a historic building too, because I believe both of them served as worshipful master of the Masonic Lodge, or didn't they?
I think my dad did. Marshall Sr. was more active in Scottish Rite.
In Scottish
I believe.
Rite, all
Yes, he
right.
was certainly in the Samuel Hamilton Lodge. I don't know if he ever went through the offices, but he was extremely active in the Scottish Rite bodies.
I know that that's where my dad went to the Masonic meetings.
Oh yes, that was where everybody went to the Masonic
That
meetings.
was a very important site for my dad. All right, we're going to let you rest just a minute, and let's get Marshall Jr. Marshall, tell us a little bit about your dad and the family, and when he came here, and what brought him into the engineering business.
Well, my father and my mother were both native Tennesseans, and they went to school at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, and that's where they met in freshman English class. My mother always said that the first day that she met him, she went home and told her mother that was the man, she'd met the man she was going to marry.
How wonderful.
So, and it came to pass, but they were married in Nashville, and then shortly thereafter, they were married in June of '41, so that was right before the war started. And my dad joined the Navy, and after World War II came about, and he served in the South Pacific in the Seabees, which is the engineering corps of the Navy. And my mother had my oldest sister was born while my dad was overseas. He didn't see my oldest sister Wendy until she was 18 months old. But so she was born in Tennessee. My other sister, Kay, was born in Grand Prairie, and I was born in Grand Prairie. But my mother had an uncle that lived in Dallas named Landon Goodson, who was a developer in this area, and he had always talked to her about they needed to come to Texas, to Texas. My dad said that he heard so many times about needed to come to Texas. So when the war was over, they packed up and they decided to move to Texas. And they came here in 1946, and I think Carlisle alluded to the fact that my dad served as the first city engineer for the city of Grand Prairie, and that was in 1946. So they moved here in '46, and he made acquaintance with Mr. Smith Sr. Certainly, I'm sure very soon after that, and I don't know if Mr. Smith was mayor at that time. It was before my time. I wasn't born at the time. So would Carlisle have been Mr. Smith Sr. been
couple of years
mayor?
later,
Okay.
48.
Anyway, they met, and the partnership, they formed the partnership soon after my dad came here. So he only was city engineer for about a year, and then they started the business on April 1st of 1947. I was told an interesting story, reminded of an interesting story yesterday by some friends at church that I had forgotten about, but my dad did mention this to me, that my parents moved here. They're from Tennessee, didn't really know anybody here. They missed the pretty scenery, the mountains and the trees of Tennessee, and shortly after they got here, they decided they were going to pack up and go back home.
Oh my.
And they actually went so far as to pack their belongings, which weren't many at that time. And I guess the one daughter that they had with them at the time, and they were in the car and actually were headed back and weren't driving too far down the road, and they weren't saying a word, either one of them. And they finally looked at each other and said, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And they said, yeah, I think I am. And they turned the car around and came back.
How wonderful.
And so I had been told that story, but I was reminded of that yesterday by a good friend.
And so you are the native Grand Prairiean on the desk today.
Yes, I guess that's correct.
Yes.
Carl got here as soon as he could.
Yes,
but,
yes. After being born in Corpus, which is one of the most beautiful cities in Texas, yet it's just lovely. Well, do you know when, did they actually start their business before your incorporation, April 1 of 47, or were they just working as friends with your dad as the city engineer, Marshall, and with Mr. Carlisle Smith as an architect major?
I'm not sure if they might have done a little bit of work before that time.
But this was the official date.
That was the official date. Marshall may have helped Dad out with some drawings and some projects up to that point. At that time, architects in the area did a lot of houses, a lot of residential work, some apartment work. That's not the case today, but at that point in time when the area was just first growing, those were pretty active projects, so they could be handled by just a few people, and I wouldn't be surprised if he might have helped him out just in the nights or the evenings or such. But they gained some good, quick, close relationship right off. Either they felt very good about each other immediately, or they worked together enough to where they knew they were compatible, and never had any problem that we know of during the time that they were in business. My dad died in '68, so he was there 21 years, and then Marshall Sr. passed away in '83.
Okay. Now, you are a Red Raider.
Both
through
of us
and through.
That's correct.
Oh,
Texas Tech,
my, Texas Tech. And when did you come into the picture? Was that when you lost your dad?
Shortly before. I graduated in '63 and went to the service for a short period and came back in '64, went into the practice, passed my exam in '66, and was brought into the firm at that point in time. So I was there as a partner for just a couple of years before he passed away.
All right, so that left you and Marshall Sr.
That's correct.
Running the business. And what was Marshall Jr. doing all this time? Where were you, Marshall?
Playing football most of the time back at that point.
Yes, yes.
Well, I didn't graduate from college until 1976.
All right.
So they were...
you let them run the business for you?
I let them run the business for a while. I let them take care of it for a while till I could get there. But they were in business together just by themselves. After Mr. Smith died, I graduated in 1976 from Texas Tech and came to work there for the firm. And then in '78, I passed my licensing exam and then was taken into the business after that time.
So then all three of you were working together then. Your dad had passed away and you had taken his position, and then Marshall Sr. and Marshall, you were outnumbered with two Warders to one Smith.
That was during the time really when I just let them have it part of the time.
Is that when you became a state representative?
And, from about 75 till about 85, 87, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it wasn't, it was shortly after Marshall Sr. passed away that I retired and came back full-time to the firm.
Yes. And how did you enjoy being a state representative?
It was very enjoyable. It was a good change of pace. Of course, it's like anything else. When you go on vacation, you know all the work stacks up. So when I came back at the end of the session, I felt like I worked twice as hard for 3 or 4 months to catch up. So it balanced out.
And before we leave this and go into the other part of the business now, you have a beautiful wife. Did she work in the business?
No, she never. She tried a time or two. But you know how it is. Sometimes you and Mr. Jackson can do it and some others can't. He must be much more gentlemanly towards you than I was to her. She wouldn't take much direction when she worked for me.
I see. That becomes very complex, doesn't it?
But she's a wonderful lady, and in fact, she's the one that's sort of spearheading our 30th or our 50th year anniversary celebration tomorrow. She's done most of the work in putting it all together.
Well, as the history major expert in Grand Prairie, Texas, we always count on Weta for And I believe her father, John Doherty, was a mayor too. So what was it like
he
having
succeeded my father.
Yes, what was it like to have a wife that had a mayor for a father, and you, of course, had a mayor for? Did that put the pressure on you politically?
Well, we were married a good time after they had been mayors, so most of that had calmed down, I think.
Okay. Let's get back to Marshall a little bit, too. We need to find out a little bit more. What was Marshall Sr. involved in? I know that on our closing, we have two wonderful pictures down here of both of the gentlemen that founded your company. Tell us a little bit about your dad. What else was he into?
Well, I know that my father, as Carlisle alluded to earlier, was involved in the Chamber of Commerce, and I think he may have served as the first president of the Chamber back in '57, I think. I know he was active in the community concerts, which was very active in Grand Prairie back in the '50s and maybe the early '60s or some.
He had some
such
talent himself. He was a
Good
musician.
singer.
He actually recorded a song or two one time, but that I don't think ever made the top 40. But
How about Rotary?
He was certainly he loved Rotary Club, was
yes.
very involved in Rotary.
And was president?
He served as president I believe in 1965, 65, 66. And he loved that. He was very much one who wanted to keep his attendance intact. And I can remember when in later years before my dad passed away in '83, when he would be in the hospital, but he would get permission for me to take him out to go and make up at a meeting so he could keep his perfect attendance intact. So that was very important to him, and he loved the Rotary Club and the association with the people in that organization.
Yes, that's wonderful. And of course, he was very important in the Turnpike Church of Christ. Didn't he help design that? That
Turnpike Church of Christ was one of the buildings that he had a part in the design of. It's almost coming up on 40 years old itself.
Yes.
So of course, there's several buildings throughout town that I think Smith & Warner has their mark on.
We're going to talk about that in our next segment, which Lewis is giving us this signal. He says, wind it up. Is there anything you want to say about, your wife doesn't work in the business either, does she, Marshall?
No, she's smarter than that.
She's teaching school, isn't she?
That's right. She's about to become a librarian next year. So,
wonderful.
For one of the new elementary schools.
Okay. If y'all will remain on the set then, we're going to add to the set and bring on two wonderful guests that you've brought along with you with your permission.
Okay.
And we'll be right back. As we continue to salute Smith & Warder on their 50th anniversary, it's very exciting. Mr. Warder and Mr. Smith have brought two wonderful guests with them, and they are going to allow me to ask them some questions and let them be a part of this wonderful interview. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for including these two great people that have been important to your business over the years. Frances Riley, Mrs. Casey Riley, welcome to the set.
Thank you very much.
We're so glad to have you with
here.
us, my dear. Yes. Would you look out into your camera now and let's talk a little bit about your tenure with Smith & Warder when you came with them and how exciting it's been. Yes.
I came in 1952, which was 5 years after the firm began. The first thing that they started me doing was typing specifications for Lamar Elementary School, which I believe was either the first or second project that we did for the Grand Prairie Independent School District.
Yes. And was that exciting to you? You knew you were making history that very day.
I was really interested in that job. I'd never worked for an architect before, but I'd had an architectural course in college, which I thought made me very well qualified. One course.
One course. Yes. And when you studied in college, what was your major and what had you intended to do?
I had intended to be a nutritionist.
I see.
But I decided to get married and have a family instead, and then we moved to Texas about a year before I went to work at Smith & Warder.
Yes, and so Casey decided to share you with an architectural firm, and this has been a long relationship, hasn't it?
Long time, yes.
Yes. And did you work for the senior partners of
Yes,
this?
I didn't, Marshall hadn't been born yet.
I
Carlisle was
see.
just a little kid running around part of the time.
Yes,
And I worked
yes.
for their dads.
Both of the dads?
Both of them,
Yes, oh, that sounds exciting. Did you find that working for two fellows like that was almost really a full-time job?
It really was.
Yes.
I had worked for other people where I had two bosses at a
Yes.
time, but this was a little more intensive.
Of all of the things that during your work for the two senior partners, what do you feel was the most exciting project that they worked on during your time?
Oh, probably that big white courthouse downtown Dallas.
The big white courthouse in downtown Dallas. Oh, yes.
Yes.
That must have been some project. You had a lot of specs to type for that, didn't you?
Actually, we had a spec writer for that,
Oh, yes.
a specialist. There were two other firms that were in kind of a partnership
I
with us
see,
on that building, and so the work was sort of divided up, and ours ended up being mainly the supervision, wasn't it? They don't use that word anymore. Observation.
I see. Checkpoint Charlie and all of the good stuff.
Yes.
Oh, that is great. All right. And you're still with them.
I'm still with them, and they don't know how to get rid of me, or I'm not smart enough to retire one.
And I believe you and Casey celebrated your 50th wedding anniversary, what, last year?
Last August.
Last August, yes.
So it didn't hurt our relationship any for me to
Yes.
work all this time.
Yes. Now, I believe you have children, and you lost one of your children. Would you like to add their name to this list? Because I'm sure that they suffered a little by your being such a wonderful employee and spent so much time there, but
Well, one thing about it, when I took that job, I got the impression that if my children needed me, they would let me go.
how wonderful.
And so if an emergency arose, I was able to cover that.
Yes.
And we had very good people taking care of the children. Christine was about 5 years old when I went to work, and Arthur was 4.
Yes.
And I had a lady come in and take care of them till they got to be school age. And Arthur and she both went to Grand Prairie School. She all the way through, and Arthur spent his last year at Fort Worth Christian.
Yes.
Thought he would like to try that.
Yes. And it's been exciting to work now for the juniors.
Yes, and it was a
How
little
compatible are
bit of a
you
change.
to both of these young men?
Well, I think we get along as well as I did with their parents, really.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that is wonderful.
Marshall still comments on the time when he finally asked me, could I call you Frances instead of Mrs. Riley?
Oh, yes, because his parents had taught him to honor his elders. Yes, I see. Oh, that is great. Well, let's get down to the other end of the spectrum here, and Mr. Bill Goffinette. Welcome to the set.
Thank you.
We're so
Thank
glad to have you here. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your beginnings with either the seniors or the junior partners, or how you fit into this situation?
Well, it's really started with the seniors in February '49.
All right.
That's when I first came to work for them. And for the last 49 years, I've been in and out.
Yes.
Worked a couple of stinches with the couple of other architects, and worked for a general contractor as a project manager and chief estimator.
All right.
So out of that 49 years, I probably spent 31 years with Smith & Morta senior and juniors.
All right. Which were the easiest pair to work with or for in a preposition?
That's really not a fair question.
And I'm putting this on tape so that we can use this as evidence, yes.
When the two juniors were growing up, I guess I had a little bit of responsibility on some of their training.
I see.
And never realizing that later years they would be my employer.
Yes.
And I would have probably reacted a little differently had I known that would happen, you know. But they're younger, and of course they're two different sets of Smiths and Mortars.
Yes.
And their philosophies are a little different than their dad's in different things, but all in all, it's been a very, very good experience.
All right. Were you into Rotary also, as all of the other?
No, I got involved in the Lions Club.
Okay, that balances off rather well in the community.
Yes, it
then,
does.
doesn't it?
1 Lions and 2 Rotarians. That's
Yes.
that kind of levels
That
things
makes
out.
it just exactly even. You heard that, fellas, didn't you?
So I've been in the Lions Club for 30 years now.
All right. Would you like to name your beautiful wife, or tell us a little bit about your
My
family?
wife is Sherry, used to be Sherry Smith,
Yes.
and we were married in 1950.
All right.
And who was your best man?
Who was my best man?
No, I guess you were
Oh,
well, my dad drove the
He drove
your
the getaway.
car. That's what it was.
That was it.
he
Oh.
drove the getaway car for
Oh,
us.
how wonderful.
And we were glad that ride was over when it ended, but
I bet he was a wild driver, wasn't he?
well, he had a brand new 52 blue Chevrolet that just come out, and nobody knew that he had it.
I see.
So we were able to escape successfully.
That's great.
And we have 2 children. Gwen is a school teacher at Garner, and our son Greg works for a computer company in Dallas, and probably a lot of people know him as a sports writer for years for
Yes.
the Grand Prairie News. He still does some sports writing.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, you're surrounded by 2 wonderful long-term employees. Is there anything we have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to give 1 to Carlisle and 1 to Marshall, and ever which one of y'all want to be next, Lewis can pick us up in there in the sound.
Well, Ruthie, I'd just say that we've been very blessed to be part of Grand Prairie's growth over the years, and to have the fine employees that we have had. Of course, both Marshall and I revere our parents and their training and their guidance, both mothers and fathers. So we're just very pleased to have been able to make the 50th year in the firm.
That's wonderful. How many buildings?
I don't know. We've got a vault full of them with the plans. I couldn't begin to count how many.
Almost all of the schools in Grand Prairie, Texas,
been
in the
very
1 minute we have left.
Blessed to do many schools, a lot
City
of municipal
projects.
facilities, some
Yeah.
county facilities, the White Courthouse and
The post offices in town.
Post offices.
And the
elsewhere.
jail downtown?
Jails.
Yes.
I would just say too that I would certainly reiterate what Carlisle said, that we've been very blessed, not only with the people that we work with, but the people we have worked for in this community. They've been very gracious and we've felt very much at home our entire life. I would say that in working with Carlisle, we didn't really have a choice who our partner was, but I would say it was a shotgun marriage that worked. And
Yes, that
I
helps.
would, I feel very fortunate having Carlisle as my partner, and it's been a wonderful run, and we look forward to having a few more.
Well, we've mentioned your Turnpike Church of Christ affiliation, but St. Andrews is
St. Andrews
very,
Episcopal, yes.
very important to Carlisle and some of the folks. And I want to thank y'all very much for being on the
Thank
show
you,
today.
Ruthie, for the
Congratulations
opportunity.
again on your big 50th.
Well, and congratulations to Jackson Vending
Thank
for
you.
being just ahead of us.
Thank you. This is Ruthie Jackson reminding you it happened in Grand Prairie because of these folks, and its history is as we live and do. And they got her.